Welcome to this episode of ArtsAbly in Conversation. My name is Diane Collin. This series presents artists, academics, and project leaders who dedicate their time and energy to a better accessibility for people with disabilities in the arts. You can find more of these conversations on our website, artsably.com, which is spelled ArtsAbly.com. Today, ArtsAbly is in conversation with Lia Pas, a Saskatoon-based Canadian multidisciplinary artist who works in the field of music, writing, and visual arts. You can find the resources mentioned by Lia Pas during this episode on ArtsAbly's website in the blog section. Welcome to this new episode of ArtsAbly in Conversation. Today, I am with Lia Pas, who is a Saskatoon-based Canadian multidisciplinary artist who works in the fields of music, writing, and visual arts. Welcome, Lia.
Hi, Dan. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for being here. Okay, so you have a very rich history of connection with the arts, whether it is by writing or through music. So I wanted to start this interview by asking you to talk about your background. What did you do for studies, and also what led you to your studies? I know it's in music, and we share a particular school. So I'll let you present yourself.
Okay. My background. It's a long story. I'll try to keep it succinct.
I love long story, by the way.
Okay. I was a musician growing up. I played oboe and piano primarily and went through all the Royal Conservatory music levels, and started playing oboe professionally in my teens. I was the alternate oboist at the Saskatoon Symphony. I decided to study music at York University because they had a very different program than most programs. So I wanted to study world music, improvisation, all those sorts of things. And York was the place for that. So I went to York University. And then I ended up moving back to Saskatoon because my husband got a great job here. So we moved back to Saskatoon and settled here. In Saskatoon, I played with the symphony again on oboe I did a lot of cooking. And I had a small theater company. We did 2 productions based on myths, The Descent of Inanna and one called Baba Yaga's Hut. And I wrote the pieces, I wrote the music, I performed in them. And then we moved to Japan for a couple of years where we taught English, and I didn't really do anything artistic except for go see a bunch of cool Japanese theater. That was my artistic thing in Japan. And after a couple of years there, I really wanted to get back into my practice, my artistic practice. So I applied for master's in theater programs because I hadn't had any formal education in theater. And I was accepted to a couple places, but I chose Dartington College in Devon, UK, partially because they had a very multidisciplinary program. And they no longer exist. They got melded into Plymouth University, I think, but it was a really tiny arts college. I think there were 4 masters in theater students. But we also had multidisciplinary classes with the writing students and the music students. And I actually ended up doing a lot of music there as well. But near the end of my degree, I got very, very sick. And by the time we got back to Canada, I ended up in hospital a week later with ulcerative colitis. And I almost died. That's no exaggeration. So it took me a couple of years to recover. So that was my first experience with chronic illness and disability, because I couldn't work for at least a year after that. And because of that experience, I actually did a video piece because I wanted to get back into a multidisciplinary practice. So I did a video poem called Susurrations about the heart and my experience of having to be really, really careful about my heart because I was so anemic. I was at risk for a heart attack. So I couldn't get my heart rate up, and that took a lot of attention. And once I was recovered, I started teaching yoga. I taught yoga before we went to Japan a little bit, but I started teaching yoga again, and started teaching voice as well. I forgot to say, I kind of switched from oboe to voice at some point. And I had studied a lot with the Roy Hart School of Voice, which is actually very physical and very psychological, and a lot of movement and a lot of, what is your voice and what does your voice mean? And so I taught voice and yoga for a while. And I ended up writing a lot of music for dancers, which was great. It was great to work with the body. A lot of the music I wrote for dancers, the dancers would make sounds as well as there being recordings. And that was awesome. And in 2015, I was working with a dance theater company in Calgary called La Caravan Dance Theater. Maya Lewandowski was the artistic director and choreographer and everything. And she's now in Paris, actually, doing a lot of Roy Hart work. That's how we met. And while we were devising that dance opera, she got a flu of some sort, and I was staying with her, and I also got the flu, and I was like, it's the flu. Went back to Saskatoon, and I never recovered. I was so sick. I was, yeah, I couldn't do anything. I couldn't sing for a while. I couldn't read or write. I was really, really sensitive to sounds. Even listening to recordings was too much for me. I could only do a few minutes at a time. And Maya actually, she finished producing the dance opera without me. She did use my music, and I had written the libretto as well. But there was another musician involved, Eric Smith, I think his last name is. I'm blanking on that. And he had written some other music. That's called Fihi Ma Fihi. It is what it is. We were working with the poetry of Rumi. So that's online, that dance opera. But I wasn't able to perform, obviously, because I was stuck at home. So again, that drive to create got me, but I couldn't do much. So like I said, even writing was an issue because of brain fog. And I was watching a lot of period dramas because they're relaxing. And in this one period drama, this doctor told this woman to take to her bed and work on her embroidery, which I know is supposed to be insulting, but I was like, I'm in bed. I know some basic embroidery from doing some Ukrainian cross stitch in high school. And so I called my mom, and because I knew she still had the materials. And she brought me over a hoop and some thread, and I started embroidering, and I fell in love with it. Absolutely fell in love with it because it was something I could do, and it was restful and it was slow. And aside from setting up the pieces, it doesn't take much energy, and is actually, I would say it's actually restorative to me. But unlike most people, I did not start with a pattern. Most embroidery patterns, people think of, flowers and words and things like that. I started with scientific diagrams.
Huh.
Oh, a big thing that I forgot to mention throughout all this is I'm also a poet. I have a couple books out. And I had been writing about science and anatomy. My mom's a physiologist, so I grew up around anatomy and physiology. So I started embroidering these text image pieces I had made where I was relabeling scientific diagrams with poetry. So that's where I started with the embroidery. And then at some point, I was meditating. I'm a long time meditator, and I was very symptomatic that day. And meditation helped me because I would sort of dissect the symptoms so they would be less overwhelming. And I was having like tingling all over my body and rapid heartbeat and all these things happening. And I started to see my sensations as embroidery stitches. So that led me to my symptomatology series where I embroider all my symptoms, making like they're invisible. I look fine. I have an invisible disability, but the symptoms of MECFS, which is post-viral MECFS, that's myalgic encephalomyelitis, also known as chronic fatigue syndrome. They're quite overwhelming, and I have improved a lot. MECFS is sort of on a spectrum. There's extremely severe where people need feeding tubes and they can't handle light or sound or anything, and they can't move because it takes too much energy to do anything. all the way up to mild, where people can work part-time and leave their houses regularly. I'm more moderate. So I would consider myself in the mild form. As long as I don't leave my house, I can pace myself carefully. But if I leave the house, I'm definitely in the moderate area, because then I can't do anything for the rest of the day, and sometimes a couple of days after, because I've just exhausted myself from leaving the house, even being pushed around in a transport chair. I can't. It's too much. That's what I was going to say. I have improved. I was more on the severe spectrum, not extremely severe, but more severe. At one point, I shaved my head because washing was too exhausting. But now I can wash myself and make simple meals and things like that. So I've added music back into, but slightly differently. I can't sing. It's too exhausting to sing, though I've started doing some really simple vocal warm-ups for like 5 minutes every couple of weeks. But I'm able to play the piano again most days, 10 to 15 minutes at a time, and that's about it. So I've been improvising. I'm finding writing music is too much of a cognitive issue. Like translating the music into a score takes there's some disconnect there now, where it used to be very, very easy for me. But I can improvise. I can make up music on the fly and record it. So that's been my focus with my music. And embroidery and music, and I am writing some poetry and some essays. So yeah, that's my very long and complicated background.
So I want to ask about the poetry. Did you start
Yes.
working on poetry before you got sick, or did it come with this moment where you wanted to go back to the arts?
No, I've always written poetry. And my first book was published in 2003. Oh no, there was one before that. Maybe in the 1990s, I had a chapbook published. I've always written poetry. My uncle was a poet, and he was a sound poet. My uncle through marriage, I should say that, my uncle through marriage, he married my dad's sister, was BP Nickel, who is a sound poet and other poet. And he was very influential on me. In fact, he was the one who mentioned York University as a good place for me to go, because he had collaborated with some of the music professors there at the time. And he really mentored me with my poetry. He died while I was a teenager, but yeah, I've always written poetry and libretto and scripts and
At
things
York
like that.
University, you did some at York, you studied some improvisation, right?
Yes,
So
yes,
people
with
like Casey Sokol, for example, right?
yes, he's amazing. Casey is great. Yeah, most people don't realize that there are improvisatory techniques.
Mm-hmm.
There's different styles, there's different ways to do it, there's different things to think about. I would say my improvisations now are more melodic and more like what I would call spontaneous composition. Like I'll come up with a theme and return to it again and again throughout the improvisation, things like that. And my improvisations are more chill than they used to be. mostly because I want to stay calm while I'm playing so I don't overextend myself. But I used to be into like the really experimental, wild stuff. You know, the wilder the better. Um, so there's a big range in what you can do through improvisation. But I love I love improvising.
And how did the evolution of your life with being sick and feeling the need um, to find other ways to create your arts, how did it I guess your style evolved with that. How did it impact it?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I mean, the big, I think the big sort of shift was the Ciceration video poem that I mentioned about the heart, where I mean, I had done a lot of yoga and meditation and stuff. And like I said, the Roy Hart work is very physical and psychological and whole body. Um, but it made me sort of look at my body as both instrument and inspiration, I would say. Um, so making art about my symptoms started with that. Um, and and it's a very it's a it I remember once talking with a psychotherapist, and she's like, I don't know if this is healthy to use your symptoms to make art. And I was like, no, it is probably the healthiest thing I could be doing, because it allows me to both accept and deal with my symptoms. Um, so a lot of my art involves, understanding the physiology behind my symptoms, understanding my own anatomy and how it's working or not working, what's going on with it. And I do think a big part of being someone with a chronic illness is accepting your limitations, especially with ME/CFS, because you're so limited. And if you overextend cognitively or physically or even emotionally, you get what's called post-exertional malaise, or PEM, as we call it. And you basically, I mean, you kind of feel like you have the flu all the time, but you feel like you have a really bad flu if you get PEM, if you exert yourself. So accepting your limitations and living within those constraints can actually be very freeing in a way. I know a lot of artists and writers and musicians even talk about, using constraint as an artistic guide, I guess. And I've taken that to heart. Constraint constraint equals freedom in some ways, both with chronic illness and with art, I would say.
Yeah.
To answer your question, I sort of wandered all over the place.
No, it's great. And I love the idea of course, it's important to recognize in what state of mind and of body you are when you create art. So I don't think there is anything wrong in uh, using the reality of whatever the situation is to be part of that.
Yes, and one thing that's happened with some of my symptomatology embroideries is people have taken screenshots of them to their doctors to help explain their symptoms, which I'm just like, wow, that's it's like, oh my God, I'm tearing up. That is so amazing, because it's easier for them to just say, oh, here is where I'm tingling on my body, exactly like this woman. who is tingling. And it really surprised me when I started sharing my symptomatology embroideries online, how many people were like, oh my God, that's exactly how I feel. Because I thought I was doing self-portraits, but people with the same symptoms were like, this is how I feel, which is incredible. I mean, it blows my mind still.
Can you tell me more about these embroideries that you're making? So, what is the process? And so you told me that it really came from the fact that your mom is also a scientist. Did it,
Yeah, she's a
and
physiologist.
oh, physiologist. So you grew up with these like imageries of bodies, and now you have your own body. And how do you connect that these two parts of your life in embroidering?
Um, well, I have a whole shelf of embroidery of anatomy books, and actually, it's kind of funny. My um my mom loves my embroidery. She's retired now, but for my birthday every year, I give her a list of anatomy art books, and she'll buy me one for my birthday every year. So I have this great collection of anatomy books. Some of them are like medical textbooks, but some of them are historical anatomy art. Um, so when I'm about to make a piece, I'll usually focus on wherever I am symptomatic. If I'm thinking about my tingling, I'll work on a piece about tingling. If I'm thinking about my liver, I have some liver issues. I'll investigate the liver. I'll look through my anatomy books and find usually a historical engraving to sort of base the piece around. Um, so I've also traced my body parts. I have a series of hands where I just traced my hands. Um, and then I'll do a bit of research so I understand how everything works together. And um, I'll I'll stitch the base image, so based on the historical engraving, and then I'll do the symptomatology stuff on top, and that's usually done freehand. I don't plan much of it out. And I really go inside my body. And it's like, what am I feeling? And stitch those sensations. Um, Sometimes I'll work off my medical imaging. Unfortunately, in Saskatchewan, it's very hard to get the actual images of your medical imaging, but I will always ask, and often the the radiologist or whoever will show me the images on the screen, and 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 then when I get home, I sketch it out really fast. Um, so so yeah, there's different stages, and some of the symptomatology embroideries are more abstract. There's one about fatigue called neurasthenia. That's more abstract. Some of them are very, very visceral and very medical looking. I have one called Bleeding Vessel, which is of my uterus. And I took the measurements of my fibroids and beaded that on. And I was diagnosed with very, very early stage endometrial cancer and beaded that on. Um, I actually finished that piece while I was recovering from my hysterectomy. So it was, and I show my pieces to my doctors as well. Um, sometimes, sometimes I know when I was dealing with some liver stuff, I was working on my liver piece, and I met with this surgeon, and I said, I haven't seen my imaging, but you have. Where are the strictures in my bile ducts? Can you point them out on this embroidery? And he was like, amazing. This is great. Um, so often start a sort of deeper conversation with my doctors because they understand that I understand enough of the physiology and enough of the medical terminology that there's there's more communication between me and my doctors. So yeah, it's a whole process, and my pieces keep getting bigger and bigger. Actually, this one I just recently finished, but it still needs to be washed some more and ironed. This is probably my biggest piece to date. This is of a vagus nerve. I'm just gonna sort of scroll it up because it's so big. So the blue is from an engraving, and all the colors are symptomatology. So
wow, it took about
yeah,
1 year.
about a year. Yeah,
Wow.
because
So
embroidery is slow.
yeah, yes, which is part of also your process of creating, right? It's something that you can do in your rhythm.
Yeah, yeah, it's something I can do reclining. I mean, right now I'm reclining back in my studio. I have a chaise longue, so my legs are stretched out. I can lean back and I'll just hold my embroidery hoop and sit here and stitch. It's like I'm sitting up in bed. It's very relaxing.
So for those in the podcast, we just saw it's a long piece of embroidering, right? It's a long piece of fabric. It's green, and the embroidering is blue and yellow, right?
Yeah, there's mostly blue and yellow embroidery. There's some red. There's a red heart. And in the abdomen area, there's a bunch of burgundy stitching.
Very nice. Okay, thank you for that part. And I want to switch to the other part now, which is the music, which is coming back to the piano. So when did you come back and what happened exactly to like give you the energy and the confidence to go back to your piano?
One of the symptoms that is really common in ME/CFS is hyperacusis. So that means you hear too much, which is probably the worst symptom for a musician. Um, but it's not just that sounds are too loud. It's like you can't differentiate between sounds. They become all muddied together. Um, and there's also a pain component to it, but not necessarily pain in your ears. It can be pain throughout your entire body. So I'm especially sensitive to low pitched rumbling sounds like construction or lawnmowers, those sorts of sounds. So if there's like road work nearby, which has been happening lately, um, I'll use like noise canceling headphones, but sometimes that isn't enough. And like the next day, my entire body will ache and brain fog, can't think, that sort of thing. Um, so this was a very disturbing symptom to me. So I did a bunch of research and went through this very long, months long desensitization process. So that involved using pink and brown noise, which are brown noise is like it sounds like the rush of a waterfall or ocean waves. It's fairly low pitched but complex, but it's also very relaxing to the nervous system. Um, I usually listen to nature sounds in my studio, which is a hyperacusis trick because it masks sounds that I'm sensitive to, but it also relaxes the nervous system. Um, and I very, very, very slowly like listen to 1 minute of music on a speaker for weeks until that felt okay, and then added a minute, and then added a minute. So very, very slowly got my body used to not only hearing music in headphones or earbuds, but in the air around me. And I was also working with a doctor who knew about ME/CFS, took about a year to get in to see him, and he had, you know, supplements and dietary changes and other ideas to help improve my energy, and he really helped. And I'm on a medication that's usually used for alcohol addiction, but in a very low dose, it helps heal the nervous system, called naltrexone. So I'm on low dose naltrexone, and that was huge for me. That changed so much for me. And it was then I felt like I could sit up at the piano for, again, 1 minute until that felt okay. Add a minute, add a minute, add a minute. So these are like months long each stage. And now I can do 10 or 15 minutes at the piano. Though sometimes things happen and I crash. I have like a bad physical crash. So like after my hysterectomy, or if I'm hospitalized because my liver has acted up, I'll sometimes have to build myself up again. Not necessarily from nothing anymore. Like I can start with 5 minutes instead of 1 minute, but I've had to do that repeatedly. You know, build myself up until I get to something that, you know, I've realized that even 1 minute is useful. People, like when you miss something that much, even 1 minute is like, oh, I did it for 1 minute. It's amazing. And you know, how do you improvise for 1 minute? That's a very small constraint, and you can come up with some interesting things. So yeah, it was a very, very slow process. But right now it's good. Right now I'm back for 15 minutes or so. Yeah.
And I think you also have a release that is coming up, right?
Oh, that's right. Yes, I released my first recording since getting sick. It's called The Hum. It's actually based on the hyperacusis symptoms I was talking about before. Not only am I sensitive to low pitched sounds, I hear this constant low pitched hum all the time. It's very quiet, but it's there constantly. It's a D. It's a low D. And I also have tinnitus, and that's an A. And thankfully, they work well together. So the hum, there's the piece, the hum. I have these low pitched layered drones on a D, and I have a piano line that's around an A, that's quite high. So the hum masks my hyperacusis hum and my tinnitus. And it's very relaxing. I've gotten some messages from people saying I've added this to my meditation mix. I play this before I go to sleep at night. So I composed it as therapeutic music, I guess you could say, for myself, but other people are feeling that as well. The editing took forever because I for some reason music editing is like it's very cognitively taxing for me, even though I like doing it. So I can do like 20 minutes and then I'm done. And getting a really organic drone underneath the piano part. I think I've got like 4 or 5 different sounds, and I wanted them to sort of cycle through each other. So getting that going took a fair bit of editing, but I got there according to what other people are saying. So yeah, I was very happy to be like, oh, I finished something. Wow. It's about 10 minutes long. Yeah, the hum.
How long did it take to record it?
Oh, months. I don't remember, like maybe probably more than a year. Yeah, including the editing, like the recording. I think I did the piano because I wanted to be fairly specific about it. I did it in a few different sessions. Um, so that probably took about a month. And then, yeah, like I said, the editing of the drone took a very long time, months and months.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. I was very happy to finish it and put it out into the world.
Well, I will put all the links to listen to it and to purchase it on ArtsAbly's website.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a last question for you before we um, end our conversation, which is about collaborations or interesting people in your life who might have inspired you to do whatever you're doing today, or how things turned in your life. If you had one or two people to think of and to name, who would it be and why?
Well, I'm going to mention my husband because he he is so supportive and so helpful. I mean, he he makes my life easy enough that I can do my creative work. Like he's very physically supportive in terms of that. I mean, marriages often fall apart when one partner gets MECFS because it's just you're not the person you were before. But he's stuck by me. Um, he's the cook in the family, so I just have to assemble meals. I don't have to cook things from scratch. If I need embroidery thread, he'll either take me to the shop or I'll tell him which colors I need and he'll pick them up for me. Um, he's just really, really, really helpful, and he understands how important it is for me to be creative. Because when I'm not creative, I'm a mess psychologically. I get very depressed, and it's just it's very bad. And he knows this about me. Like we got married in our early 20s, so we've been married for over 30 years now. So he gets me. Um, Other creative people I've worked with. Um, I mean, I'm going to mention Opera Mariposa, which other people may have mentioned on the podcast, but what they're doing in terms of um, awareness campaigns, their May awareness campaign for MECFS and fibromyalgia is incredible. It's like this little community forms for a month, and we share each other's work, and it's wonderful. And it's not just opera artists; it's visual artists and writers and art activists, and it's like they've really created a beautiful thing with their May awareness campaign. Yeah, and they're great to work with. Stephanie and Jacqueline Coe, the sisters who run Opera Mariposa, they both have MECFS. So they get it. They give us lots of time to get our work to them, and they're just really wonderful to work with. And I'm always in awe of Jacqueline's singing because I can't sing, but I used to sing. But she's got this incredibly powerful voice, and she must have an incredible pacing technique because wow. Um, and I've also met through them Christine Baltus, who's a Toronto artist, visual artist. She does collage work. She has MECFS, and she does gorgeous collages. A lot of it about her symptoms, not all of it, but a lot of it about her symptoms. Really powerful, beautiful work. And I think if there's anyone else. I mean, there's so many fiber artists online. I love and have connected with. Laura Bundenson is also does scientific embroideries, mostly about the brain, and just beautiful, very different from my work, um, but gorgeous. And she's been great helping me figure out the nuts and bolts of things like how much do you sell a piece of embroidery for, because it takes you hours to do. Um, so she's been really helpful, and there's a really great sci art community on social media, who has been really supportive of my work. And Brendan Mello is the guy who started all that. He's in Toronto. Yeah, so lots of people, not all disability related, but yeah, any art gets done in a community. So
Yeah, thank you so much. I was wondering, are you exhibiting your embroideries?
um, mostly online, to tell the truth. I am trying to figure out if I have the energy to frame them myself or if I need to shop that out. So I've gotten the basic materials to stretch my embroideries on mat board, but I haven't gotten to the point of actually trying that out yet. So I do have one piece in the Saskatchewan Arts Board permanent collection, but they took care of the framing. So that was awesome. So that piece gets rented out as part of their art bank. So it's might be up somewhere right now. But mostly online, just because of the framing thing is still a hump I need to get over. And my husband was a visual artist. He's sort of taken a break from that, so he kind of knows what's involved. So he is going to help me, but I need to just get over that hump. So I do share my work online a lot. And there's some sort of online galleries of my work in various places. I did have a bunch of pieces published in a recent anthology called Sharp Notions. And actually one of my embroideries is on the cover, a lung embroidery. It's an anthology about stitching, about fiber arts, knitting, all that stuff. Great essays, really beautiful essays, published by Arsenal Pulp Press in Vancouver. So there's a bunch of embroideries and an essay about my embroidery written by me in there. I would like to show and sell my work, but it's hard to knowing what's involved in sending work out into the world, not like physically. It's a lot, and it's not. It's a lot of physical labor, let alone cognitive labor. So it seems like a lot. So I haven't quite got there yet. Digital world, awesome. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, thank you so much for this conversation. It was really
Yes.
interesting.
Thank
And
you.
all the best for all your projects and everything.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me to participate here.
Have a great day and talk
Yes.
to you soon
You too.
about future projects.
Yes.
Okay, bye, take care.
Bye.